Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy we're together. My name is Liz Loeb. I use she and her pronouns. I'm here on Dakota land in my home in Northeast Minneapolis, where I live with my spouse, Sarah, and our dog, Chloe, and our kid, Lyra, who is 8 months old and on the floor next to me because it's a snow day. And I am so glad we have this time together and so appreciative that each of you made the time to be here. We are recording this session. The purpose of the recording is the purpose of the recording is so that we can share it with others who aren't able to be here. If we come to a part in the conversation where you're speaking and don't want to be recorded, let us know and we will honor that. Lyra agrees that consent is awesome. And because we have an hour together, we will launch right in. Most of you know me and Jessica already, but I'll give, for people who are joining us for the first time, I'll introduce myself briefly and then invite Jessica to introduce herself. I told you my name and my pronouns and the land I'm on. I'm also the Associate Director of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, MNIPL, and we work with communities of faith, conscience, and spiritual practice statewide and nationally at the intersection of racial justice and climate justice. I'm a civil rights attorney by training. I spent a number of years litigating national racial justice cases, but I've spent the bulk of my career in social movement organizations and in an ecosystem of community organizing with so many amazing people. And that's what brings me here today, among so many other things. Jessica, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Thank you, Liz. Hi, everyone. It is fantastic to see you all today. I love opening up our waiting room and seeing people pour in with such smiles. My name is Jessica Intermill. I also use she, her pronouns and come to you from Dakota land. I am a lawyer by training and principally work with tribal nations, helping them structure their governance and litigate their treaty rights. And that brought me to land history consulting work that brought me to MNIPL. In my land history work, I think it's important to teach people about the land that they stand on because that helps them place themselves in historical context, both the context of the past and the context of the future. And I am really excited to do that with you all today. I think that's it for me right now, Liz.
I was just answering a question in the chat, which I love. Please, I think those of you who have been here before know this, use the chat, interrupt us, ask questions. We want this to be as participatory and collaborative as possible. A little roadmap about what we'll be doing today. This is our fourth session and it's our last session that we have scheduled, but we're going to talk about whether we should schedule more sessions together. But for this time, we will briefly revisit some of the content from our last session. We'll use storytelling to connect the threads we've been discussing throughout the previous 3 sessions. And we'll talk about where we go from here. So talk about last time, do some storytelling, and talk about why storytelling matters. And then we'll spend the last part of our time talking about a concrete action we can all take and where we want to go as a community that we've formed together from here and what some of the options for that is. How does that sound as a plan? I see thumbs up. I love to see that. We'll dive right into it. Jessica, do you want to take us to the leftover section?
I will.
Because it's lunch. Leftovers.
Starting with leftovers for lunch.
It makes me so happy.
Just as a really brief recap, in session 3, we talked about the importance of exploring and grounding yourself in your own tradition on your reparations journey. And we encourage you to bring this learning from the session back to your congregations and your faith communities to really dig in there as well. But I also want to briefly return to the question of the prosperity gospel. Now, this is something that I brought up in the last session, and we got very different feedback from people. And it seems to kind of correlate with folks' faith tradition. what sort of response they had. So, for example, some, and often folks who identify Catholic, felt pain at being associated with what they felt was a caricatured, heretical, Tammy Faye kind of Christianity. Some others who often identified Protestant were just unconcerned because it's not how they relate to Christianity. And others, all of whom identified non-Christian, thanked us for naming out loud that this does exist in a way that is much more deeply rooted for them and more insidious than televangelism, because it's an unnamed pressure that they feel as part of the Christian hegemony within the United States. And so we bring this back up now, really to note that this is what it is to grapple with layers of meaning and history and identity. I mean, recall that the swastika was a symbol of good luck until it wasn't. All of the experiences that everybody had coming out of session 3 were real. We want you to validate, we want to validate that we understand that they're very meaningful for you. And we also want to push a little bit that all of these reactions are ones that we can learn from each other. So our point really is to point to the importance of doing work in congregational cohorts and in multi-faith spaces. And note that Liz and I are considering and invite some feedback on whether we need to go more deeply into this specific topic of how the prosperity gospel informs US history and US experience in different cohorts, which is all to say, thank you for your feedback. It is tremendous that you all trust us with those pieces, and we thank you, and we want to keep the dialogue coming. Any questions on that before we go forward?
That's what I was going to say, Jessica. I see Joan.
So thanks for characterizing how the feedback came to you, Jessica. I appreciate that. I would just add, as a Catholic person who is always interrogating what Catholicism means, because that's the context that I live and work in and pray in. I didn't have that same reaction of pain that you characterized the prosperity gospel. And I wasn't worried about us being connected with that, because I do think that American Christianity has created sort of a homogenous way that we take that on sort of in a hidden way. And that's what we're always looking at in the context of our parish life and the kinds of dicey conversations we're having in our context. So I find it really important for me to be in contexts like this with other faithful people under other contexts to kind of help me also reground the places where in my own context there is a problem potentially of how we understand that gospel. So I just wanted to add, like, the complexity of this is something that we've been grappling with at Pax Christi for the last however many years, very specifically about how to have these conversations that people would just can't, it's a blind spot for us potentially. And so then when you bring it up, you have to deal with the disconnect or the upset that happens in uncovering a blind spot. So thanks for that, for bringing back the conversation, because yeah, that's all.
Yeah, thanks, Joan. I really appreciate the language of, the sort of the blind spot idea that when you don't know what you don't know, right? Including a whole lot of people not knowing how this lands on folks in other traditions. This is a fantastic place to sit in a circle of trust and explore.
I saw a hand from Tova.
Man, Liz, nothing gets by you. I'm just wondering if real quick, we could have a recap of prosperity gospel, just like a quick definition.
Jessica, this is all you.
We had some materials that will go much more deeply into this in our session 3 recap, but the idea is sort of this coming out of the Gilded Age, building on Protestant work ethic ideas.
Can you say what the Gilded Age is, Jessica?
So that's when rich people get really, really rich off the backs of laborers who are not getting rich, in a nutshell. And so as a way for the rich folk to explain why they got rich and other people didn't, they're like, well, God wants me to. And this occurred sort of in this parallel Christian and capitalist context where they just sort of built and stacked on each other, got to a place where it's sort of like the power of positive thinking, where if I believe that I am deserving, and I believe in this Christian God, then I will be promoted and prosper, and then it does get caricatured and pretty gross as it goes on into the radio world and then into televangelism, and is the Tammy Faye, Jimmy Baker kind of thing. It still exists, and this is another complicating factor, it does still exist a lot in the global majority. And so the sort of historical roots that I was talking about are different from where it is now. But we wanted to, I had very shorthanded that in the session 3 conversation, and it was too short. And so we wanted to bring it back and expand it a little bit here. But thank you, Tova, for, making us show our work. All right.
Any other reactions or questions either to that or to anything that came up from the last session? I just wanted to make sure we had a little bit of space for that. I see Kate's hand.
Thank you. I just want to say or add on to that. I think I've heard that the other side of that too is not only that, I get rich because I deserve it because God wants me to be rich, but also you're not doing well because God does not like you. So that's yeah, the way it plays out too.
Thank you, Kate. Yes, double click. All right. Well,
Amazing. Do we feel like we can move on? Did I miss anybody who wanted to share? Awesome sauce.
all right.
So in this next section, so we talked about last time, now we're going to talk about stories. I mean, all of these things are intertwined, but we pretend like they're sections for our groundedness as facilitators. And because Jessica and I both like outlines. Jessica, I don't mean to speak for your experience, but I think we both find them just so comforting. So we have an outline, friends. And this is the storytelling part of the outline. And I want to start by actually saying, why is it important that we spend time on stories as part of the work of repair and reparations? And not just any stories, but the stories we understand as our own, the stories we understand as being important to who we are, especially the stories of how we came to be through generations, whether that's through biological family or chosen family or other forms of inheritance and ancestry. And so for me, I think I have I have found at times in my life that I had an attraction. Jessica, are you able to do the waiting room? Awesome. I've had an attraction to the idea of doing repair work or reparations, and those are not interchangeable. They're sort of distinct things we're talking about that connect to each other. But I've had the idea that doing repair work and reparations would be really cool because it matches my values, because it matches an idea that I have of who I want to be. Like the Liz I imagine is a Liz that would do that, right? And that's great. Like there's actually, if that's how you get here, fabulous. There's, and really like a sense of purpose and values is an amazing way to come into something. But what I've learned, I'm 44 years old, and what I've learned in a couple of decades of doing this is that this is really messy, lifelong work that doesn't come with clear answers. And it certainly doesn't come with single answers. It's not a campaign that we can win. It's not a thing that I can do right. And it's certainly not an item on my list of Liz being an awesome activist that I can check off or wear a badge for, or like have the cool t-shirt from. I really like cool t-shirts. And so for me, I know that if I really mean it, it means living differently in interconnection with others. And so when I do work to know my own story, to know who I am through the stories that make me, I have the chance to go from an idea of what I should do to an embodied sense of repair and reparations as being part of who I am, as being non-optional to my existence. And I found that sense, that embodied sense, fortifies and nourishes me more fully for the long term, and that I gain access to that through stories in a deeper way. And so that's what I've got. We all have a reparation story. If we go deep into how we got to where we are and where we live, there's a reparation story within that. No matter anyway, I could say more about like from the different perspectives and experiences, right? But it is there for us. And so I'll pause because I see a raised hand, which is very exciting. Anne, come on in.
Yeah, hi. I suffer from an issue with this kind of thinking or how it plays out. And I mean, I'm definitely confronted with the genocide in my background while I do race work, but I'm also really not interested in hearing about Jewish trauma right now, particularly when there's a genocide, a frontline genocide right here. And so I take my stories to a private place to process, but I'm really tired of hearing of all our stories. And I want us to be quiet and listen to Indigenous stories. And it's like I say, it's not that I don't want to bring myself to it, but I don't know, I'm a practicing Buddhist, and we try to lay aside stories so that we can connect. I truly believe that Indigenous ancestors are my ancestors, as are Black people who came across on the Middle Passage. And the more I invoke my stories, the more I separate myself out from putting them aside. And again, I don't believe a lot of white trauma, white-bodied Jews and white-bodied Christians belongs in the space of repair work. It is a time for atonement and a time to lay down our stories as an act of almost atonement, to just hear somebody else's story. So you know, that's where I'm with it. I actually went offline yesterday when we were kind of doing our story. I was like, this isn't what I want. And I left. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I'm open to hearing.
Yeah, before folks jump in, I know I need to just take a breath. I'm gonna, if that feels helpful or supportive to anyone else, I'll invite you to do that. You do not have to. Because Anne, I want to actually be able to be with the words you just said. So I'm going to inhale. I'm going to exhale. I can still feel my heart beating a little faster. So I'm going to let that be. I'm not going to try to force it to beat slower. I'm just going to invite my breath. I'm reminding myself that I can feel my feet. I can feel my fingers. And there's so much in what you said. And I think what's challenging is that you said it in a way that had a lot of shoulds and musts. And I believe those are completely true for you. And I believe that you feel like it's incredibly important to express that and to have us understand it. Because we are in a space with people with so many different kinds of experience and different truths, I know as a facilitator, it feels like my role to say, we are here to share what we believe in passionate ways, but I'm committed to there being space for people to really disagree, to need something different, to come to this with something really different. And so I want to take the insight of what you said and hold that with a little bit of distance from not the passion with which you said it, but from some of the declarativeness. And so with that, I see hands. I'll invite other people to speak. Carrie, I saw your hand first.
I loved your storytelling introduction here, and it reminded me of a short piece by Howard Thurman, excerpted from his writing about God's requirement to Micah to walk humbly with God. And could I just read it really quickly? It's very cool.
Sure, go for it.
How do you walk humbly with God? How do you walk humbly with anybody? By coming to grips with who I am, what I am, as accurately and as fully as possible, a clear-eyed appraisal of myself. And in the light of the dignity of my own sense of being, I walk with God step by step as God walks with me. This is I, with my weaknesses and my strengths, with my abilities and my liabilities. This is I, a human being, myself. And it is that God salutes. So that the more I walk with God and God walks with me, the more I come into the full orbed significance of who I am and what I am. That is to walk humbly with God. I kind of love that.
I'm so glad that speaks to you, Carrie. I love the image of an orb. That's very cool. I think there were a couple other responses, so I'll invite them in and then I'll give a little bit more context. I'm scanning the little Zoom boxes. So was there anyone else who felt like they wanted to offer something right now or? Awesome. So, there's so many layers. It is okay. It's actually okay for this learning circle to not be a space for absolutely everybody. There might be really good reasons why somebody says, this isn't where I need to do this work. Because Jessica and I are coming in with some premises. We try to make those transparent. We try to say those aren't the only right or correct premises. They're where we're coming from. And that means we may or may not be good. We may or may not be useful guides for you or for other people, right? Like we get to choose who we journey with. And there's so much room for so much difference. And there's so many ways we can get there. So it's okay if people decide this isn't the right container. It's good. It's more than okay. It's actually a good thing. Part of where I'm coming from, and then Jessica, I'll open it to you, is I've been in a lot of spaces led by Black, Indigenous, Native, POC, and Brown folks, where it's been really important in those spaces that I am white, that I don't claim the space with my stories, right? That I don't come in and be like, hello, it is time for it to be about me, right? not super helpful, friends. In my experience, which is only my experience. But in a lot of those spaces, folks with whom I'm in deep relationship have asked me to do work around my own story with other folks who also hold whiteness, while folks who hold different racial experiences are also doing many different kinds of work, often in deep disagreement, just as we are often in disagreement, right? And so what I keep coming back to is the reason storytelling is a form of connection for me. And it really, I appreciate the argument that it isn't. I mean, that is also true. But for me, I just noticed so many ways that white supremacy disconnects us from our relatives and from each other. And there's such a focus, in my experience of white supremacy, on meritocracy and individualism, and it erases that we came from people, and that the people we came from, whether that's through biology or very different kinds of inheritance, the people we came from made mistakes and also gifted us things. And so if you remember Jessica talking about stacked time, right? That we're living in multiple times at once. For me, story is an authentic way into that. But Anne is also right. And I'm so grateful that she offered that so that we could wrestle more deeply and pause and ask some questions of what it means to be putting this forward. So Jessica, do you have anything to add?
All of that, yes, absolutely. And I want to emphasize that the stories that we're talking about now, the everybody has a reparations story premise, is not the stories of the trauma that has informed our experience generationally. Instead, it is stories of where our ancestors, be they biological or cultural or any other form, political, where they intersected with other people who are not white and what happened. And so that's just to amplify a little bit the Liz's part of our ancestors made mistakes. And I think that knowing those mistakes can be a really instructive way to continue to deepen into the work. So with that, I want to, and then the last part I'd add about sort of the importance of story is that the way that I'm thinking of reparative stories and reparation stories is essentially a three-step process. First is that, and again, talking to white folks here, you go out and learn what your truth is of where you came from biologically, culturally, politically, nationally. Figure out the pieces where white people broke stuff. Like, right, where have we caused pain? Where has our white supremacy impacted others? Step two is to then act on that, to start to try to repair what's broken. And then third is to notice that repair in ourselves. Notice that by going through those steps, you free your descendants from the mistakes that have already been made by other people. You can free your ancestors by living them into the whole people, whole messy human people that they were. And then you can free yourself, because even though it costs you, right? These reparative actions come at a cost. The importance of doing them, the benefit, the intangible return is so much greater than the cost. And so when we think about a reparation story and sort of those pieces, that's what I mean when I say that everyone has that story. Frozen 2 for the parents and grandparents among us is a reparation story. It has all three of those components and it's fantastic. But I also want to deepen a little bit more by showing you and telling you about my story as an example of this sort of three-step. So my story is sort of bicultural. From my mom's side of the family, I'm second or third, depending on how you count it, generation American from Eastern Europe. My family left before the Holocaust, but was still outrunning other awful things that, as Anne said, are not part of this story. But it's very American tale, very Jewish diaspora, enter through Ellis Island, life in the tenements, you know, it's very Fievel. On my dad's side, it's much different. These are salt of the earth, Great Plains folk. I grew up visiting the family farm that he was raised on. And for it's a very manifest destiny sort of American story. There's farmers and farm wives generations deep. And as I continued to go back though, I noticed that I could keep going back and back and back and back. Whereas on my mom's side, you get about 2 generations before New York and you're done. But on my dad's side, we could go all the way back. We have traced to the colonies, which is to say to colonizers and beyond. And one story that really stood out to me, I'm going to share my screen. Maybe we shall see. All right. So one story that stood out to me is the story of Jonas Bronk. Now, I'm showing you a slide of New Amsterdam. This is an outpost of the Dutch West Indian Company. This is a chartered company that, like the Dutch East India Company, was chartered to facilitate the transatlantic slave trade. It is the group that when we hear the story of Manhattan Island being purchased for trinkets, this is the group that did it. And this is the map from the 1600s of their what they called settlement, what is essentially a colony. And you can see if we go to the next slide, and I'm going to see if I'm able to do that. This is
Do you
how
want
we're
to put
more-
it in a presenter mode or have us see the preview of all 8 slides?
Yeah, we're
It's
going to
kinda
stick with
small.
we're
Okay,
going to
good.
stick with the preview because I can't figure it out how to do it differently. My apologies. We're more used to seeing Manhattan Island in this north-south orientation, but what I want you to see here is that the 1600s colonizers' choices are ones that we can still see today. So for example, the blue line here is a street that they created. It is a street we now call Broadway. The yellow was the wall that was at the edge of the settlement. It was the wall that the settler colonizers constructed to keep indigenous folks out of the colony. They constructed it with slave labor. And that wall is, once it was taken down, is what we now call Wall Street. These are very familiar ideas that stretch way, way, way back. But if we go back to the way that the folks in the 1600s would have taken a look at the map, you can see that the settlement began at the southern tip of the island and extended to the north. But the second ship that came to this New Amsterdam colony had a man in it named Jonas Bronk. We're not sure if he was Danish or Mennonite. There's some conflicting information there. But what we do know is that when he set out to make his farm, he wanted to go a little bit to basically a little farther away from the settlement than what was already there. And so he went on the other side of the Harlem River and decided that that's where he wanted to set up shop. He loved the place. And there's sort of 2 things that are important about this, this letter that he wrote, where he talks about the invisible hand of the Almighty Father surely guided me to this beautiful country, a land covered with virgin forest and unlimited opportunities. It is a veritable paradise and needs but the industrious hand of man to make it the finest and most beautiful region in all the world. So you can see both the ego that he brings to this, right? He is really excited to improve upon creation. But the other thing is that he talks about, we just need the industrious hand of man to really conquer this island and make it ours. But he did not mean his hand. He actually came on the ship with some indentured servants. And so this is language from a contract where the gist is that 2 guys are going to clear that virgin forest that covers the island to create his farm. They have to continue to do it. And that's how they pay off their indentured servitude to get to the United States. That second man, Lawrence Dietz, is my great, so 9 grandfather. And what this means when I put that next to all of everything, right, is that my ancestor, who was an indentured servant and a colonizer, clear-cut, swindled Lenape land to create a slave market that would 200 years later become the financial center of the United States, and 50 years after that would become my other ancestors' salvation. So what does that mean for me? When I told one family member about this, they sort of brought their hand to their stomach. I feel it sometimes as a tightness in my chest, but I also feel a joy in connecting the pieces. It's almost like a validation from my ancestors that I'm on the right track, that they are, that they want me to liberate their memories. And what it did for me in the next step, because the stories don't just get to stay done, right? They're not done. We're still creating the stories. So I looked into, Jewish white girl from Nebraska who lives in Minnesota, realized I have some repair work to do in New York. And so I went and looked and found all of the tribes, by the way, have, for the most part, been removed from New York because that was the start of Manifest Destiny and they got pushed out by the United States. But there's a Mannahatta Fund, which is a fund that others have created where they can direct what are called honor taxes, voluntary payments that the descendants of colonizers make to repay the debt of our ancestors. And when you see that story, the part that I just want to sort of re-highlight, I went out and learned my truth. I used a biological ancestor, but again, it could be a land connection, it could be a cultural ancestor, it could be political, whatever. Go do it for George Washington. I acted on that truth to repair what's broken. And when I reflect, I notice that that repair helps me spiral deeper into the work to find more stories, to continue the repair in the way that that grounds me. So we're going to pause again and ask for reflections and questions. Also, hi, Mom.
Jessica's mom comes to the learning circles. It is the sweetest thing. Jessica's mom has a name. Her name is Nancy. People are not just people's mothers.
Hi, everybody. I am not able to use the video today. I don't know why it's not cooperating. So I'm in the black here, as you can see, but I'm waving to everybody as we speak.
We're waving back to you, Nancy.
What does this raise for folks?
Tova just asked such a good question in the chat. What if our ancestors don't want us to liberate their stories? Sometimes I feel like I'm acting in spite of my ancestors.
Yeah, Liz, if I can cut in,
Please do.
I wanted to put that in the chat because this is really fraught and I tend to ramble when I'm talking about it. So feel free to mute me if I'm just going off on a complete tangent. But my most notable ancestor was the first director of the FBI, and he deported Emma Goldman and he hired Herbert J. Hoover, and he made a living off of like chasing anarchists until like public opinion was so bad because his methods were so terrible that he was basically like forced to step down. I think he would be really pissed to see the kind of work that I'm trying to do here. And I think and the same is true on the other, well, it's different on the other side of my family, the Jewish side of my family, but whenever I talk about how I'm like trying to be more observant and like turn back to Jewish ritual as like a way to de-assimilate myself, the response I've gotten by and large has been, why are you trying to do that? We're American, it doesn't matter anymore. And I struggle a lot with trying to ascribe motivations to my ancestors while also understanding that they had the best intentions, but they also did some pretty awful things, and their worldviews were very, very different from my own. And so sometimes I feel like I've just got to drag my ancestors along by like the chain that is our bloodline and be like, okay, we're doing this work now. You may not agree with it, but it's what needs to be done. And that's just something that I want to struggle with because I don't feel that same kind of like embodied ancestral rightness that I hear Jessica describing.
Yeah, thanks, Tova. And
yes.
The other part of the story of Lawrence Dietz is that he trafficked his wife and got the most severe punishment in the history of New Amsterdam and got his ear cut off, and he was banished to New Jersey. So like, they're messy. And would I want to have dinner with him? Probably not. And also, I want to do what's right for my ancestors too, or for my descendants too. And so sometimes you take the good, you take the bad, and you do the best you can, right? I think Marie's hand was up next.
I also don't want to go on and on because that could be my way, but so I'm going to try to do like an outline thing. Number one, I would like to just say that let's see, how do I say this? First of all, a lot of our ancestors come from families who, I know in my family, we all have different ways of thinking about this and ways of being in the world. And so some of our ancestors might be very happy that we're doing some of this, you know, that made mistakes, but didn't know or didn't intend to, whereas some of them maybe did. But then I also want to think that time and being on the other side of the veil, maybe they have a different way of, you know, feeling about what they did on earth. So they may not be the same in spirit as they were when they were living. And then third, I just wanted to say that I found out that one of my ancestors was an indentured servant as well. And so I'm trying to find out about that because I think that's an interesting thing to just, you know, to learn about and to try to understand how that all worked. So thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Thanks, Marie. Let's see, am I going to pronounce Sienna correctly?
You are. Thank you, Jessica. I so appreciate your story. And in my own journey, what I've been working with a lot is the idea of intergenerational trauma and the fact that not only are indentured, you know, the people who are our ancestors that came here under duress of various kinds were traumatized, but everyone was. The situations that everybody fled were extremely traumatic and oppressive. And I'm trying to listen not only in my daily conversations, but also as I reach back and confront or just reach back and learn more about my ancestors. And my background is deeply rooted in the South. And I know there are slaveholders in my history. And I'm listening for the pain that wants to be resolved, so that even though it might seem like some of our ancestors who were very much caught in the systems that they were in might have been bad people or acted badly, I'm always listening for the pain that was there and how the work that we do heals that pain through all the levels and the generations. Because even though people look like they were on top, you know, obviously there was a lot of suffering at every level of life. That's where I'm kind of at in my journey.
Thank you, Sienna.
Oh, thank you. Friends, I feel like we are just starting to even barely figure out what, like, the depth of what we could be talking about here and how much wisdom and complexity we all bring to what it is that we're even trying to move towards. I'm going to pause us because we have a concrete action step that I don't want us to miss out on. And Jessica, I see your eyes. I'm talking about the honor tax. Yes, yes. So I totally acknowledging this is abrupt and we were like finding our way towards something amazing and vulnerable and that it's so much to teach us. And I feel like the right call is to offer you this action step because we are called here in service of action. But Jessica and I are going to come back deeply to all of this, and especially in thinking about what's next and where we can go next together. How does that sound? Amazing. Honor taxes, Jessica.
Okay, so everybody has a reparations story. And right now, after joining us for 4 of these sessions, your story is tied to Dakota land. You've heard both Liz and I say, note that we are coming to you from Dakota land. In particular, we're coming to you from a place where the 1851 Treaty of Mendota made promises to the Dakota in exchange for cession of cession CESSION, which is to say the changing of land from Indigenous hands to the United States. It was like over half of Minnesota that this Treaty of 1851 ceded. And the United States didn't keep its promises. It didn't actually make the payments that it said it would. It created conditions for starvation that were multi-year. It was a multi-year starvation event. So that by 1862, the Dakota did not have any other choice except to go to war with the United States. And by 1863, the United States had won that war and expelled the Dakota and the Ho-Chunk, because of course they must be involved too. They were not, but expel them all from Minnesota. The epicenter of this violence was a place that the Dakota call Kansayapi. It's what the word means, where they paint the trees red. It's now home to the Lower Sioux Indian community, and that is a tribe that I have represented in my lawyer work for over 15 years. They have allowed me the tremendous privilege of creating an honor tax in Minnesota. This is the first Dakota honor tax. Y'all are the very first ones to hear about it because it just got clearance like this morning. And so I invite you all to join me in recognizing and remitting our debt to the Dakota by making payments through the honor tax. They'll go directly to the Lower Sioux Indian community to use for governmental purposes. And this is just sort of one, like the Mannahatta Fund, this is another tool that we can use to return wealth. Any questions about the honor tax?
It's in the chat. So as we're going out into the world and talking about the layers of this work, and people ask, is there a thing I can do? This is a pretty good start. Jessica, can you define the phrase honor tax?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know, I don't remember the actual dictionary definition that I put on the website, but the general idea is that it is an honorable thing to pay your debts. It's not a mandatory tax, but it is a remittance for governmental purposes. And it also recognizes a contribution that in this case was not made voluntarily, but it is a way for us to honor and commemorate it.
It's a way of saying, oh, right, we live on your land that was taken through force. This doesn't change or fix that happened, but it is an acknowledgement that is also tied to material resources. It is some sort of start. Sienna, is your hand up about the honor tax, or is it still up from before?
I think I just forgot to take it down.
Any question? Oh, Deborah has a hand raised. Excellent. Deborah.
One of the pieces that I've been thinking about in the midst of all these conversations is we talk about our ancestors being colonists. What about the colonization that continues in the systems that we continue to live in and that we continue to perpetuate? Most of us are connected in some way with a spiritual faith, religious community, which have all been, continue to be colonizing communities, if we really look carefully at them. Is there any way to talk about how the system in which we practice our religion, spirituality, faith can be decolonized, including nonprofits like Interfaith Power and Light, and how maybe a tax like this might be helpful to at least begin the conversation within the systems that we work. Because it's okay for me as an individual to do something, but if the system in which I live doesn't decolonize, then all we're doing is perpetuating a quiet colonization or a loud colonization.
Oh, Deborah. Yes. And I don't say that with glee. These are serious things, but oh, my watch decided to try to talk to me about it. Yes, bring it back to your congregations, nonprofits, and communities. Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light is Indigenous led. The chair of our board is Native. There are many Native people on our staff and board, and and Black folks and other folks of color. And so we're figuring out as an organization, as a Black, Brown, Indigenous, POC, and Native led organization, what it means to be part of this. But that is a side note to yes, oh my gosh, absolutely. We I feel like my brain has so many directions that I'm actually going to pass to Jessica, because I could take us in a million ways. And we want to talk about what comes next. So maybe this is the right segue. But Jessica, do you want to help focus us for a minute?
Yeah.
Because Deborah, I'm so excited about what you said.
Yes, Deborah, yes. Okay, so anybody can make a payment to an honor tax. And as you've heard me talk about a couple different ones, the Mannahatta Fund, the Dakota one, there's one in Oregon, there's one in Washington, there's one in Los Angeles, San Francisco Bay Area. You can kind of follow along to where these might go, but it could be a payment from an individual. It could also be a payment from a congregation. Congregations don't pay property taxes. I disagree with it, but the United States has very strong ideas. What would be the property tax? Basically, the value that is not paid to the United States could be a really great measure of what that congregation wants to donate to a land tax or to an honor tax. There's other measures as well. And Deborah, your question really sort of wraps in also if you remember back to the 5 circles, the eco map, the political solidarity piece of reparations work. And this is, this idea that everything is multifaceted within reparations work. Sometimes it's about a payment, sometimes it's about changing structures, like, for example, supporting our relatives who are fighting for driver's licenses for all, or and for restoring voting rights. I mean, it was a really good day. These are things we could be doing in addition to making payments, because it's not an either or, it is all of it. And we're going to keep going around the circle, and we're going to keep doing it until we die, because these are way bigger than our generations to create, and we're going to keep going. And we want to know what you want from me and Liz to help you do it, because we just kind of planned out 4 of these sessions, and we're going to be really excited if 20 people showed up. And 225 of you did. So what do you need next?
So we're going to send out a survey with the recap email, actually asking you this question in more detail. But in our last few minutes, we could do another round of learning tables. We could do small group coaching. We could create congregational or community action plans. We could make a Facebook group. We could make a listserv. We've created something together. What are your quick thoughts on what we want to be to each other next? I see Rachel in the chat, thumbs up for congregational action plans. So much in the chat, and Kelly has a hand raised.
Yeah, one thing that would be helpful for our congregation that we discussed last week is to have a list of the people and the different organizations that are represented in this group, because we know that everybody is taking this back and thinking of ideas and coming up with questions, and it would be really helpful to know what other people are doing or thinking, so we're not all trying to figure it out on our own.
Yeah. That's a really helpful question and point to make. Chamuel, am I saying your name correctly?
Shamuel, that's good.
Shamuel,
yes.
Thank you.
And what I think would be helpful to me is to keep us on the reparations path, and maybe to hear stories from other people on what they're doing, so that we can be excited and get ideas from others. That would, because I'm looking for tangible things to do. And it would be helpful to me to just be reminded I'm in community and others are also working in tandem, even though I don't know them.
Yeah, thank you. Jessica, I am answering a couple questions in the chat. Can I ping pong to you to support folks?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat about just sort of what are other people doing? What are some ideas for, you know, what our congregation or what we could be doing as individuals can be doing? The link that I just dropped in there goes to my website, and I have a page where pretty much anytime I hear about something reparative, I put it in, you'll see my outline. Y'all, I love an outline. And so there's like a land back section, a tax section, your church or congregation might have artifacts that, you know, somebody at some point thought it'd be a really good idea to keep these indigenous bones, and you can return them because it was not a good idea. All sorts of different, like, concrete, this is happening, this is who did it, kinds of things to do. What other, we've got, let's see, I've got Chamuel's hand, but I think that might be a leftover.
We're going to collate all of the ideas that are coming through the chat. So even if we're not responding to them specifically, we're tracking them.
Yep.
Who else would like to say something? What do people want? Another round of learning circles? I'm seeing some nods from the folks. Oh, I know there are a lot of folks. I'm scrolling through. Oh, I see nods.
So learning circles with like the same content so that you can bring in other people to have the same conversations, or different content. We should figure out what that is.
Yeah. Maybe, Jessica, maybe we need a little advisory committee to bring together of folks who would want to help us figure that out. Oh,
yes,
we could ask for signups in the recap email.
Uh-huh.
Learning circles focused on action. Yeah, there are so many types of action we could just spend an entire hour on. Jessica, we should bring together a group.
We need a task force.
We need a Scooby team.
I
don't know if anybody else grew up on Scooby-Doo.
We need a Scooby team.
We need to hear from Indigenous people. You know, that is like, there is a tension in bringing together a predominantly, but not entirely white group. There were folks of color and Indigenous folks who are on these circles, but focusing on internal work was a choice rather than making a platform to hear and experience Indigenous folks and Black folks. And I think we need to really think about that balance moving forward. I think there's stuff to learn in what we didn't do, right? Yes, action on policy issues. And MNIPL is a pretty useful clearinghouse for action on policy issues. We just last week had an amazing lobby day at the Capitol in deep coalition with so many other groups. It was a movement-wide effort and a movement-held effort around Indigenous rights and climate justice. And so we're becoming a place where we hope you can go for policy action. Jessica, can you put our website in the chat? We will, I'm looking at the clock time, which is a construct, but we're going to use it. We will put so much of this in the recap email. For now, I want to do two things. The first thing is I want to ask you for money. Please, if you are able, make a contribution to MNIPL or become a sustaining member. It's a sustaining donor with a monthly donation of any amount. That's what lets us do this. So I want to be really honest about asking for that. We can keep doing this work if people are able to invest your resources in the power and possibility of making it happen together. And the second thing is I want to offer so much gratitude to Jessica, to all of you. It is such sweetness in my life to have spent this time with you. And it feels so special in the world to know that we all came here out of a hope and a belief in what we could be together. I'm gonna play some music and I'm inviting you to stay on and maybe put in the chat something you learned, something you're grateful for. It is just beyond an honor to be here with you.